OTC Markets Group operates one of the largest US stock markets, trading over 12,000 global and US securities. As a growing number of ASX-listed miners seek to diversify into and enter the North American market, OTC Markets is emerging in prominence. Yet to many investors and companies alike, the market is not well understood. Joining me today to shed some light is Jason Paltrowitz, Executive Vice President of OTC Markets Group. Jason, nice to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Jason, could you start by giving us an overview of how OTC Markets Group operates and its role in global financial markets?
We are actually the largest stock market in the US for non-US equities. As you pointed out, we operate a market with over 12,000 securities, and we tier those securities across three separate markets based on the level of disclosure and the financials of the company. So on the low end, we have our OTC Pink market, which is an open market for investors to be able to trade all sorts of different types of securities with information in order to price risk. On the upper end, we have our two top tiers of the market. These are regulated, SEC regulated markets, our OTC QB market, which is a venture market for early stage growth companies, and our OTC QX market, which is the market for kind of much larger global brands. CSL out of Australia, as an example, trades on our OTC QX market.
And in your experience, how has the perception and engagement of Australian companies with the OTC markets evolved over the recent years?
Well, what's interesting is that companies from around the world don't realize that even though they might be listed in their home market, that it's really difficult for US investors to access that market. In Australia, for instance, because of time zones, currencies, custody costs, it's really hard for US investors to access directly into Australia. So our markets have grown exponentially over the years as companies from around the world want access to US investors, want to be able to offer their equity on our market in a US dollar denominated security that trades during US market hours, but do not want to be listed on the traditional US stock exchanges because of the cost, complexity, and risk that goes with becoming an SEC reporting company. So we give these companies access to those investors in a much more economical, efficient, and less risky manner than traditional exchanges.
And what are some of the distinct benefits that Australian mining companies can gain from trading on the OTC QX or OTC QB markets specifically?
Well, what's interesting about the US is there's a significant number of what we call self-directed investment. It's really retail money, but large amounts of retail money. And from a mining and resource perspective, it's a lot of people that are very interested in the sector. So one of our biggest markets is actually Canada, where you have all of the junior miners and exploration companies that want to have access to that money, that want to be able to offer their equity to those US investors. But believe it or not, even in Canada, find it difficult unless they have an OTC QX or QB quotation here in the States. So from an Australian perspective, it's very much the same story. Is the US, between all of the gold and the earth metals and all of the conferences and investment opportunities here, Australian investors want to be able to access those pockets of capital. And again, as I said earlier, it's very difficult to do that unless you have a security that trades during US market hours in US dollars in a place where US investors can buy and sell and research securities, whether it's Schwab or Merrill Lynch on their phone or online. We create that bridge to allow Australian mining and resource companies to access that investment pool.
And for an Australian company considering OTC markets, what are some of the initial steps and requirements for trading on the OTC QX or OTC QB?
Sure. Well, first, and really our special sauce is that you have to be listed on a foreign qualified exchange. So primarily for companies that are listed on the ASX, that would be the first step. From there, it would be to look to see, do you already have a ticker symbol, a quotation here in the US? And if you do, creating an application to one of our OTC QB or QX markets. Again, what differentiates us from the exchange is what's called the foreign private issuer exemption. And so if you are listed on the ASX, you're actually exempt from having to be SEC reporting in the US. And so you can use your Australian disclosure and listing standards in order to transport yourself here to the US. It becomes simply the application to our market, the providing us with the local market disclosure, your financials and whatever it is that you have to make available to your regulator. We then take that, transport that into the US, and within 6 to 8 weeks, you can have a security trading on one of our SEC regulated primary markets.
And what are some common misconceptions about the OTC markets among Australian companies, and how do you address these?
Well, probably the biggest is that OTC markets is a penny stock market, right, for uninvestable securities. And, that's really something we fought for a long time. We are a fully regulated, what's called super ATS. So we are an SCI entity. Our QX and QB markets are regulated. And in fact, we are home to some of the largest global brands from around the world: Roche, Adidas, Heineken. I mentioned CSL, Anglo American Platinum. These are companies that want to have access to the US market, but do not want the cost, complexity, and risk that goes with being a Sarbanes-Oxley SEC reporting company. So, in fact, we have more non penny stocks trading on our market than you would find in the other markets in the US. And so that's probably the biggest one. The second would be that we're only a market for retail investors. And while a lot of the investors that access the securities on our market are retail, we're also being accessed by all the largest institutions as well. The fact is, if you have a security that trades here and you want to buy a company, we are a US dollar quote where investors of big and small during US trading hours can access that liquidity. And the fact that you have two markets, you actually broaden your liquidity and time zone base to make a much more efficient trading market for your investors.
And finally, looking forward, how do you see the relationship between OTC markets and Australian mining companies evolving in the coming years?
It's only going to grow. Recently, I think it was last week, we did an event here with the Australia Trade Commission, in which they brought 10 battery metal companies over to our market to present to investors. And it's partnerships like that with the Australian government, the Trade Commission, the issuers. We have over 80 Australian companies trading on our markets already. That just continues to grow. And as issuers are continuing to seek additional pockets of capital, seeing the benefit of the US self-directed investor in their equity picture, we see tremendous amount of growth opportunities for us from Australia and for Australian issuers, looking to grow their businesses here.
That was Jason Paltrowitz, Executive Vice President of OTC Markets Group. Jason, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.